I'm your host, Jade,
And I'm your host, Emma.
and this is
Lashing Out and Nailing Life. Today we are talking about mental health and self-employment, the conversation that we avoid.
And I just wanted to say from the beginning, we're talking about self-employment. We both don't have employees. So I can imagine
Yes.
that adds a whole different layer to your mental health. So we're not going to speak on that because we don't know what that's like. This is solo entrepreneurship.
Yes. Yes. Solo business owners, solo small business owners, solo whatever.
I was thinking about that when I was reflecting on what we're talking about today, and I was like, well, I don't know what it adds when you have employees, but I can imagine that adds a whole other layer. So if you have employees and you want to chime in the comments section, I'm very interested to know what your answer to these questions would be.
Yeah. Or if you are still experiencing the same things, maybe just at a bigger level, or maybe it takes less stress because
You have people to help you out.
yeah, because that's some of my points that I wrote down.
Yeah, because we're sole providers.
Segueing from that, do you think owning a business forces people to ignore their mental health more than a traditional job does?
I feel like what I'm about to say is controversial, but not necessarily. Because I fear that most traditional jobs also force you to ignore your mental health. And that's like from service based jobs when you're working retail or food to law enforcement to everything in between. Because in a world where I feel like we're getting better about acknowledging
Yeah.
mental health, we're still taught that, and there's almost this expectation that it never seeps into your work. So while I feel like we do have to ignore our mental health a little bit more because we run literally everything, even if you are working for somebody else, I feel like there's this expectation that, well, even if you are depressed today or having an episode of any kind due to any mental disorder, you still have to come into work.
I actually thought the opposite because I feel like most of the people that I talk to in a traditional job setting tend to they tend to take mental health days. Like it's more acceptable for them to use a sick day for their mental health in the traditional job, desk job setting. Not as much, like you said, when you're talking about other service industries, but also I don't interact with a ton of people besides Garrett. But even with his job, I feel like if he was really struggling physically, mentally, that he would be able to use just a sick day and they would be like, okay, so I feel like it's a little bit, I had written down because with more traditional jobs you can leave a lot of your stress at the door. Garrett comes home and he's like, I'm not thinking about work for the rest of whatever. So from that perspective of when we're stressed at our job, we don't really just get to come home and turn that off. And I'm typically having to think more about work than I want to than when I worked in a more traditional job setting. Even when I was in retail, it was I'll deal with that tomorrow, versus now it's I have to deal with it today, because if I don't, then I'm going to have to deal with that and 50 other things tomorrow.
It's funny because my second point is complete opposite from your. I said that what I will say is I almost think you can prioritize your mental health more when you work for yourself.
I think it really just depends. Not to throw out any names or anything. We know someone who has had some mental health things come up recently, and they were able to last minute move things around. I think it's more the fact of while we have the flexibility to take the time off, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the flexibility to turn our brains off during that time, I guess. I used to hate camping and now I love camping because it literally disconnects me so much that I cannot think about anything because there's nothing I can do about it. Versus if I were to take time off, if I were to take work off this week, I would still be having to deal with other work things, I guess. So I said here, what we've said in previous episodes, I feel like we have the freedom to take the time that we might need for our mental health, but it's harder for us to justify taking that time off, when we were sick and things like that, because when we're sick, we kind of have to because we don't want to spread things. But if you're going through a hard mental health phase, and maybe that's a society thing. Like, we don't consider that time that we need to take. So there's a trend on Instagram right now of people saying there's like, they put in quotation marks, like, you know, POV, somebody says, you're so lucky to be so booked and busy, or you're so lucky to have grown so much. And then it literally flips through people saying, I'm working through me showing up to work even though I was insanely depressed and didn't want to be here. Me showing up to work even though my neck and back were killing me and I had to go get like a cortisol shot in my leg after, like, crazy stuff. And I felt like that fit really well into this episode because it kind of bothered me a little bit that people were doing that, because I know that we struggle a lot and we try to show clients like it's not as easy as it looks, because a lot of people think working for yourself just gives you so much free time and freedom and you just get to do whatever you want and live a luxurious life or whatever. But it also kind of bothered me because I was like, why did you do that? Why were you working through, like, physical pain, let alone, like, showing up to work even though my grandmother just died kind of stuff? Like, so that's what I mean is I feel like, and it probably just depends on the person. But I feel like with me, when I'm struggling mentally and I don't want to show up for work, I still have to show up for work. So,
because I'm so close to my clients, because there's also this point of view out there right now, which I thought was the one you were going to bring up originally, but it says point of view, somebody says to you that you dealt with that so well, and then it says, no, I just told the same story to 20 different clients until I was over it. And I feel like that's what I relate to, because I'm so close to my clients, that if I'm having a bad time, my clients make me feel better.
yeah.
And I feel like I do the same for them. Like, it's not this, if you want to be my client, I'm not going to sit there and berate you. It's not what I do. If we're close, though, we tell each other our stories, and I think that's super sweet. So I almost feel like, to a degree, with where I am with the clientele I have, almost working makes my mental health better, which is what happened when I went through everything 3 years ago. However long
It's getting
ago
so
it was.
far away.
So far away. When I went through, like, life crisis 3 years ago, honestly, working made me feel better, because the number of times clients would come in and they'd be like, that only happened a week ago, you shouldn't be working. And I'm like, no, I want to work. Like, I like this. It makes me feel better. And I think that's
the different perspectives maybe that we're coming from, is like a lot of my stress comes from the, like, pressure of keeping a sustainable job. Like, a lot of my pressure, probably, if we're gonna get deep, not like we never do, probably comes from, like, financial pressure versus, like, outside
That's
factors.
so funny, because if I was gonna add things for us to talk about to this, they were financial questions.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I've worked it into some of these other ones, but, like, I feel like for me, the biggest thing I've realized since moving out is a lot of my stress comes from, like, money. And, like, yeah, money isn't everything, blah, 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 but, like, I'm not gonna live in a cardboard box. And I'm also, like, used to a certain lifestyle of, like, not living in a cardboard box. So I feel like that's my stress. Like, my outside life is relatively stress-free. Like, I don't have a lot of relationship drama. I don't really have any relationship drama or friend drama or, like, family drama. And I'm not in a phase where, like, people in my life are passing away or, like, doing, like, there's not, like, those outside stresses. So the stresses that I have are the things that happen at work or going to work or just feeling tired but still having to go to work, which everybody has to do, you know. But, like, you know, there's just those things that I feel like if Garrett really, if he woke up one day and was like, I can't do it, like, I just can't do it, I think he would be able to call in his sick days and it would be fine, versus if I can't do it, like, I'm losing out on income. So, like, hey, I'm taking this time off and I need to, you know, recharge or whatever. And we've talked about this in, like, our burnout episode and stuff too. While we have the flexibility to do it and it's, you know, quote unquote okay to do it, it's still, it depends on what stresses it would be relieving. So, like, there's a nail tech I follow and she's having a ton of, like, neck and spine issues. Which is crazy because some of y'all must not be doing the right ergonomic things when you've been doing nails less time than me and already deteriorating into a meat sack. But she was like, I'm having to take time off, I'm having to do this, and like that makes sense because she physically can't do it and whatever, and it's affecting her mental health. And those are like those outside factors where like she's being forced to take that time. And maybe none of this makes sense, I don't know. But I feel like, again, like most of my stress comes from work-related things. Like I'm trying to build and expand my business. I'm trying to do it on the timeline that I want to do it on. I'm trying to have enough money to survive in an economy that everything is expensive. But I also am trying not to raise my prices to a point where I'm really not making more because I'm taking on less. So it's kind of like, as we've always said, like that balance of things. But then again, I think most of my stress comes from like not feeling like I'm making enough. And that's also because, you know, this past year, it'll be a year in August, like we moved out. And I went from not really having to worry about my financial situation. You know, I had years where I didn't pay myself. I had years where I wasn't paying myself a livable wage. And I had built up this, I don't know if nest egg is the right word, but like this cushion in my business bank account. And then I moved out and I thought, cool, if I can just maintain that cushion but still pay myself. And then it started being like, okay, but now it's digging into that cushion, you know, $300, $500, $600, and like building up to where to keep paying myself my salary, again in like air quotes, it ended up like taking that cushion away, but also I had to like live and maintain my income. So, and then I paid the IRS too much money and blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, so I feel like most of my stress comes from that. But I was filling these out with Garrett. He's going to hate I'm mentioning him so much. He does not like to exist. But he said that he thinks that my job feels more stressful than his because he can leave things at the door.
Maybe I'm just better at separation. I don't know. Lately, I'm just at peace with everything, so I feel like...
That's why I'm like, I think the different perspective is like my stressors are coming from the job, not necessarily doing the job, but like the back end of the job, versus I feel like your stressors are outside of your job.
Yeah.
Like I feel like the most common things that you're like, girl, it's always like your physical health and, you know, your
My good old physical health.
your relationships like outside of work. So maybe that's the different perspectives too. Is it depends on, maybe it really just depends on like where your stressors come from.
Well, I think that's like the biggest thing in this, and like that's why I like that we do this together, is we have very different opinions and very different lifestyles to begin with, and mental health is very personal. So what affects your mental health person to person is going to be completely different.
Yeah.
Which is also something for you to keep in mind if you're listening to this. I feel like this is kind of a question where it's like an easy answer, but the explanation is going to be different for both of us. Do you think being self-employed changes the way you experience stress or anxiety?
Yes. Yeah. I feel like personally it's changed how often I feel stressed or anxious. But also how I manage my stress and anxiety. I feel like there is a lot of things that I used to get anxiety or stress over that I kind of had to figure out how to work through and like get over it in a sense, because there were bigger things that replaced that. I've talked to my mom about this too. Like it could just be a coincidence of growing up and changing in life and whatever. But I used to be so introverted that, like, I hated meeting new people. I, like, didn't order my own food until I was, like, 14, like, maybe 13. But You know, I wasn't very, like, I wasn't as outgoing. I wasn't as, like, open to making new friends. And I feel like when I started my business, I even still had that a little bit. Like, I had more friends at that point just from working at a salon, but I had to, like, make myself go to a networking group. And not because I didn't want to, like, add something else. It was because I was like, oh, I'm going to have to interact with people I don't know who don't know me. And so, like, I had to get over that anxiety. But then, like I said, like, the added stress of, I definitely feel like right now, I go through phases. And, like, right now, this month, I feel like I've been the most stressed. And I keep telling my clients, I feel like I'm doing too much. But it's stuff that, like, I don't want to stop doing because once I get through the doing too much, it'll be better in the long run.
Yeah.
So, which applies to even just how we've talked before about, like, starting a business, is a lot of people don't want to work the hours that they need to work in order to grow. So kind of that thing, like pushing through the hard times because you know that the good times will be good. And I even put here, I've definitely been more stressed about my financials than I probably ever have been in the past.
That doesn't help, though, because you and I are both just experiencing moving out as well. So that's not just all.
And I think that's something good to talk about is, like, yes, we both moved out and we both are in apartments now. And that's a huge step that our businesses are able to financially support us. Mm-hmm. But then again, like, the added stress of the not really having a fallback. And I feel like I would honestly maybe feel less stressed if I had moved out on my own.
That's crazy, because what I've learned is I could not afford to live by myself.
I wouldn't have been able to afford to live by myself. But I think, like, the moving out on my own, because I feel like part of it is, like, well, if I fail now, then not that, like, Garrett would be disappointed in me and, like, but I think it would be one of those things where, like, now we're getting to a point in our lives where, like, other people depend on us also succeeding.
That's fair.
So
that was one of the things I was thinking about the other day, is when we moved in together, Joe was so confident in that I can afford this apartment alone. So, like, if anything happens to my business, he's got it. Whereas I was sat there thinking about it the other day, and if something happens to Joe and his job, I have a good amount of savings to last us a few months, but after that, like, my business is not sustaining the whole
Well, and that's kind of like Garrett's whole thing is, like, he has a good job to where, like, there have been months where I'm like, I don't know, and he'll be like, it's fine, I can get it, which I'm glad that we're with men who aren't going to be like, you have to pay your half out of time, because
if I started slacking and was lazy every month, then he'd get on me.
But, like, relationships are such a give and take. And, and Garrett knows that, like, what I'm trying to achieve is going to make our lives better. Yeah. Because if I can get to a point where we are successful enough to where, like, when we have kids, someone can stay home. Like, he knows that that's a goal of ours. And so he knows, like, that's almost like we were comparing it to relationships where the other person is getting, like, their doctorate in something, and maybe the other person has to work, like, 2-3 jobs while they're in medical school or whatever school that they're in for a long period of time, but then that person becomes a doctor, surgeon, I'm blanking on the other thing that people can be that's a doctorate right now. Doctor, surgeon, any of those jobs. And then it makes it to where the other spouse is like, okay, cool, now I get to not work. But a lot of times it's like women working 3 jobs while their husband is in medical school, mainly, like, the people I've interacted with. Even in salons, like, I worked with women whose psychologist, that's the other job I was trying to think of, whose husbands were studying to be, like, psychologists or, again, doctor surgeons. And they were like, I'm working every single day so we can afford to live while he's working, but for free in medical school. And then once he graduated, it was like, cool, I'm cutting back now. I'm working 2 days a week, but he is working all the time and, like, making money. And I've seen that a lot where it's like, because at that point, too, depending on if they're following the normal, like, college path, then they reach the age where you're having kids, and then, like, the wife gets to stay home and, like, help be with the kids. So, yeah, Garrett, like, knows that if he has to cover things every now and then, it's because I have a big plan, I guess. Which actually segues I know we talked about this, not doing this, but actually segues into a question that I had saved for later, which is, do you think the fear of failure or disappointing people affects your mental health more than people realize as a business owner?
Definitely, because I think anyone who runs a business. Oh my gosh, I wrote the answer wrong, so now I've slipped up. I think anyone who doesn't run a business doesn't understand what it's like to run a business.
Yeah.
So for that reason, it's an obviously like, yeah, they don't realize a fear of failure or disappointing people heavily affects us. That being said, I feel like it's more a fear of failing myself over other people.
That's what I think too.
Because I know the people around me at the end of the day are never going to be disappointed in me even if I fail, because they're so proud of the fact that I even tried.
Right. That's what, again, I was filling these out with Garrett last night and I told him he was going to be mentioned a lot. But I was like, I feel like the fear of failure specifically is the biggest one for me out of the two, because I feel like so much rides on me being successful. And not just necessarily like successful now, but how successful I plan on being in the future, which is kind of what I had mentioned. Like, me and Garrett have talked about how like we have dreams of the future that rely heavily on my business being successful. Now, plans change, people, whatever, we can go with the flow, it doesn't matter. But like our current realistic dream plans do rely on like my business growing and expanding, because he's not really in a line where like, yeah, he'll get promotions and stuff, but nothing's going to really change how we're able to live our lives as much unless I grow and expand and am successful in the things that I do. So I feel like, but again, I don't feel like he would be disappointed in me if those plans didn't work out.
Yeah.
It's more like I would be disappointed that I wasn't able to achieve our goals, I guess.
I think I'm just stubborn. So, like, while I do have a fear of failure, and I've had it for the past 4 years, don't get me wrong, I also haven't failed over the past 4 years. So I've got this stubbornness in me where I'm like, well, I'm not going to fail. It'll all work out. Because if I was going to fail, it would have happened those 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's what because I had, like, such a trial happen just after I hit my 1 year mark. I think I just have it so set in my brain that I'm like, no, I can make anything work and it's gonna be okay.
Well, and I think that's the thing too, is like, it's all relative to that. What would failure be considered for you?
Yeah, exactly.
Because if failure for you is, if your like actual failure is having to close your business because you are making $0 at all, like no profit to buy anything, no nothing. My fear of failure is again that like financial stability of not being able to pay myself. Like, even if my business survives, I think I will be the most disappointed in myself if I have to stop paying myself in order to like build back up. Okay. So like if I have to like move back in with my parents, like that would be a level of the failure for me, you know? And not because they would be disappointed in me or anything like that, but I would just be disappointed in myself that I like let it get to that point.
Yeah.
And
if you're surrounded by people that you think will be disappointed in you, get better people. Please.
Yeah. And that's hard, especially if it's your family that feels unsupportive. I would say, like, we've both had the experience where both of our parents were very supportive of us.
Yeah, we're both very fortunate.
But my extended family, I think, was a little bit skeptical in how I could do, because now I get more of the, like, I go back and visit family and they're like, we're so proud of you, versus before they'd be like, how's it going? How's it doing? And now they don't really ask me that anymore. They're just like, wow, we see what you've done and we're so proud. Versus, like, my parents have always been like, just the fact that you did this, we're so proud, kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that really depends.
I mean, you're right. Everybody has a different statute of failure. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And that's something good to think about. Like, if you know what your quote-unquote rock bottom would be, which I even think is different than failure for me, then you kind of can view, like, at what point is the point to, like, quit while you're ahead almost. Like, if you know that your failure is bringing in no money, then the minute that you feel like that's happening, you can pivot versus like waiting too long. Which people have done, like, oh, I invested all this money, it's not doing anything, I'm pivoting to a new career, or
I think that's the biggest
like
thing
that.
that's overlooked when you become a business owner. And I'll be transparent with people in my life that like talk about wanting to start a business, and I'm like, I'm not sure you can do it. Because if you don't have the kind of mental capacity to be able to pivot and look at things and see, how do I approach this from a new direction, running a business is very difficult.
It's almost like you need to have a little bit of overthinking, to like an overthinking trait.
You just need to know how to evaluate a situation. And I feel like there's unfortunately a lot of people who go into fight or flight and that's it. I have a freeze mode, which seems kind of useless. I understand that initially. But if you freeze, that means you're watching everything from every angle, depending on the kind of freeze you have. If your brain freezes too, it's not helpful. But I kind of have the ability to freeze in a way where I have the time and the capacity to evaluate everything that's happening. And what little change could be made to make a big difference. And that's the big thing, is like sometimes all it takes is the tiniest little thing. For example, my business, and I was stubborn forever thinking my location was a great location. I was off of 2 major highways. Anyone can get to me from anywhere. This year I took the dive and I moved to the middle of Parker, where there's not a major highway, and the only major highway that goes into Parker is a toll road, so I don't blame people for not wanting to take it, and yet it's made me super successful. And I was actually talking to one of my I don't even know what to call her. We have 3 rooms. She has one of the other rooms. I was talking to her, and she was like, well, Parker's missing a lot of estheticians. And I hadn't really thought about that until she said it, but yeah, the esthetician world is kind of lacking in Parker. So it's made a huge difference. And I was stubborn for a long time not doing that. And it's not that my business was failing by any means. I was making consistent income, but I wasn't making a substantial amount. Whereas this point, now I set a goal for myself when I moved in here, because we can on the app we use for taking clients. And I pretty much, minus 2 weeks since I moved in, hit it consistently. And when I set it, I was questioning if it was a realistic goal for me to hit, but it's proven to be. And that was just an example to me of one small thing that arguably I should have pivoted earlier, because Allie kept asking me to move in there and I kept telling her no. And it's made a huge difference. So being stubborn sometimes as a business owner also will draw you back.
I feel like a lot of traits are kind of, like I said, like I feel like the people that I see that are the most successful, like I said, which you worded it better, but I just said the overthinking trait, but like the ability to evaluate a situation or all angles of a situation it's like that blessing and curse. Like that's great for a business, but then sometimes it like leaks into other, like you're being stubborn in other capacities, or you're over evaluating so much that you like walk yourself in a circle and you're back to where you started.
Well, it's also like stubbornness has a positive and a negative. Like I'm stubborn to the point of, this is going to work, it's not going to fail. But I'm also stubborn to the point of, this is right. And it's a couple years later, you're like, no, it wasn't.
I've also recently thought about the fact of like, some people have that, not like no fear, but like that comfort of, well, if this fails, like I'll just do something else. Like I'll just do a different career. I'll just go work here. I'll just go do this. And like, I don't want to do that, because I do nails, and nails is what I love, and there isn't really another job that would give me the satisfaction of that. Like,
but I think for that reason you won't fail.
I feel like I'm failing now, you guys, which is why we're doing this. But I was saying, like, I think my biggest fear is having to like go back to school. Not even just like I'm gonna go work retail, but like, oh, I'm gonna get a job where I'm going to make more, in in quotation marks, whatever, so I'm gonna pivot and go into, coding or whatever.
See, and
I
I
think
had
that would make me sad.
well, that's why I'm like, I'm not going to fail this because I had that crisis last year, and you know that. And that's why I went and worked retail additionally for a little bit. But I sat there and I was like, what else would I do? And I'm like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing else I would do.
So I feel like that adds almost a layer of stress in its own way, especially because now I'm like, we've both felt these things, is like, hey, we don't want to do anything else.
Yeah.
And so if we fail, we'll be forced to maybe do something else that doesn't give us the
Or
happiness.
You can look at it at the positive side, Emma, and it means you're not going to fail.
This is a glass half full, glass half empty situation.
Who was I talking about that? I was like, I feel like I'm the annoying friend now because I only view things half glass full, because if I view things half glass empty, my life could be kind of miserable.
Yeah, that's something. You have to learn how to look at things half glass full. Like, I'm segue, kind of, not really. Off topic. I'm like I said, I've probably been like really stressed this entire month just because like I feel like I'm doing too much, but they're all good things. So like, I'm building an app. I haven't really brought that up. I'm not gonna talk about that anymore, but I'm doing that. What else am I doing? Oh, I've like branched out into TikTok, even though I refused to, and now that's what I'm doing. That does not bring me as much joy, but I did see that there was like a missed angle, especially because now we have the podcast, and I didn't really want just a TikTok for our podcast, so at least it's like more than just the podcast. But I'm doing that now, which is a whole nother level of things. I'm looking at studio spaces again because now we're in a phase of leases ending up and blah, blah, blah. And I just feel like I don't have, me and Garrett are trying to buy a house. And I feel like that's why my whole thing is the financial stress right now, because I feel like we're doing all of these things that are going to require a lot of money up front. And now it's money that I'm slowly not having to be able to do that. Yeah. So I feel like my brain is being taken up by a lot of things right now.
Well, this is a good question then. Have you ever felt like your business was getting the best version of you while your personal life was getting what was left over?
I definitely think that the circles that I surround myself with are very similar. So, again, I was talking to Garrett about this. I don't really feel like my outside relationships are as affected because the way that we choose to spend time together is the same. So like in my romantic relationships, like we can just exist in the same room and we're okay with that. And, Garrett comes home, he's tired, I come home, I'm tired. We can just sit and exist, and that we consider that like quality time. And like the friends that I have don't expect me to just be like texting them all the time, making plans all the time, seeing them every weekend.
Yeah.
They're kind of understanding of like the only times we're going to see each other are going to be at our appointments or filming a podcast. Unless we really like plan it for like a month or 2 months ahead of time. But even my friends that aren't Jade, they're very understanding with like they're very similar too. Like we're all really busy, so we don't feel like, I haven't seen you in 3 months, that we can't be friends anymore. It's like, okay, sometimes I Snapchat rant one person, sometimes I FaceTime another, sometimes we make plans and it's not until August 2nd for the Renaissance Festival, or like things like that. So I don't feel like, from talking to the people around me when I was answering this question, none of them feel like my business is getting more of me than they should, I guess.
I feel like that's something I had to learn to communicate, because for the longest time I had a few high maintenance friends. And while there's nothing wrong with being a high maintenance friend who needs to see your friend every week, I'm just not the person for you.
Yeah.
And if any of your friends are a business owner, they're probably not the person for you, because a business just takes a lot. I also answered this with like the fact that sometimes it's vice versa. I feel like my personal life gets not necessarily maybe the best version of me, but more of me than my business does, just because of whatever is going on. And I feel like it's something that's really difficult to find the balance in, especially in the beginning. And then when there's busy and slow seasons, I feel like you probably fluctuate where the quote unquote best version of yourself is going. But living a completely balanced life is always impractical. Like, it's never gonna happen. You get these influencers who act like their life is perfectly balanced.
Well, and it's just kind of like that waves. Like, you're gonna have waves, and there's going to be points where you feel like everything is perfectly balanced, and then there are going to be points where you're like, whoa, this is taking more of me. Just because, again, like we were talking about, if something is going on more in your personal life, like even just your physical health, even if it's work related, but like physical health, if somebody in your life or close to you, like, you know, passes away, if a pet passes away, if, you know, your housing situation is changing, like all of these outside factors that can unbalance how much you're able to give to your job. And then there's going to be moments where, you know, there are times where I'm here working on my computer, and there are times where, you know, I'm having to pour more into the work outside of work. And I think it really just depends on the circles you're surrounding yourself with, if that's going to actually bother them bother them a lot or not.
Yeah.
Because again, like sitting here, and Garrett had mentioned, like, sometimes I'm editing the podcast, or I'm filming a video, or I'm editing a video, and he listens to the same sound 55 times. But it doesn't really take away from our together time, because we are okay just existing in the same space, which is really nice, because it makes it to where we don't have to, like, we still go on dates, you know, like a real big, long, all-day date, like once a month-ish, but it doesn't make us feel like, in order for us to spend time together, that we have to do that all the time.
Yeah.
Because also we're not like that. Like, I'm not the type of person who wants to do something every single day that we have overlapping, because, you know, we can go to the grocery store and consider that together time, you know? And I think that's stuff that, because I've been talking to people before too, where, like, once you have kids, that kind of changes, because you're introducing other people into your, like, living space and your, schedule and stuff. And so it makes more sense to have to schedule that together time. But again, for like our lifestyles now and how things are, I don't feel like anyone around me feels like my business has taken over from being able to spend time with my relationships.
Yeah.
So, did you have anything else to add?
No.
Well then, Jade, what would you say to someone who feels alone in what they're experiencing while trying to run a business?
I'm just gonna read this one because I'm tired.
We are filming a little earlier than usual today.
I've been trying to talking about balance, I've been trying to get back into the gym. So I feel like my body is still in shock over the past week and a half. I think that's also playing into this. My big thing is that you're not alone. And most likely someone has felt what you're feeling. If not every other business owner has felt it at some point. It's something that I've stressed before, that there's a lot of benefit to having friends who also own businesses. And that's something that I kind of pivoted to surrounding myself with. And so if you are listening and you feel alone while you're running your business, my challenge to you is to find someone else who runs a business and start building a relationship with them. It can be us.
We love long distance relationships.
That is true. Yeah. So that is my challenge to you. If you're feeling alone and you don't have anybody, if you're feeling alone and you have people around you who run businesses, try to start those conversations.
Yeah.
If you're feeling alone and you don't know anybody else who runs a business, try to find somebody who is running a business and start a relationship with them, because you're not alone.
We started this podcast because of that.
Yeah.
Like, we started this podcast because we realized that people weren't talking about things. No. And we were all business owners. And so Jade would come in and, you know, I would be stressing about something and maybe she's stressing about something, but we're not talking about it. So we just feel like, well, nobody else is experiencing this. And then once we started those conversations and we started being open about, like, well, how much are you making and how much is this happening and how is your schedule working? just those little things, it started being like, oh, okay, so we're kind of in the same place, and that's a good sign.
Yeah.
And oh, we're kind of like, and we'd have other friends who would not really talk about it, and then we'd be like, you have to tell me because I'm dealing with this and it's stressing me out. Are you dealing with that? And they'd be like, oh my gosh, yes, that's also what I'm dealing with. So
it's conversations that feel taboo to begin with, but once you get into them, the more normal they are, the more normal you feel.
And I think it's that fear, which we've mentioned this in other episodes before, of the fear of feeling like you're not doing as well as other people, and that like imposter syndrome and social media and blah blah blah. Yeah. But the amount of people I've seen who are kind of doing that fake it till you make it, and then you find out that they're faking it until they make it, and they're just stressed out as you.
Yeah.
Then it does kind of remove a layer of that like false, I don't know, identity. I don't know.
I feel like there's a false narrative.
Yeah, like just, again, starting those conversations and making them feel less. I mean, we've had conversations about our personal relationships where you've told me things and I'm like, that's totally normal. Like, that's totally normal. And I've had conversations with other people who I'm like, I've told them about certain things, like, is this a guy? Like, is this a living with a guy thing? Or is this a red flag? And they're like, it's a living with a guy thing. It's fine. Just starting those conversations. I feel like as a society, we're becoming more open with a lot of topics that like my grandma wouldn't be talking about.
She'd be like, you talk about what?
Yeah, I mean, even just like the conversation of like women's bodies is becoming such a bigger topic. And there's so much more research coming out about like pregnancies and periods, and PCOS was just renamed to PMOS. Yeah. And like, these are huge things that, like, when my grandma was growing up, you don't talk about that stuff. Like, you just...
and for that reason, they didn't know much about that stuff.
Right. And so when you, like, using that as a comparison is when you start those conversations, even just mental health conversations. I mean, June is a huge month for mental health awareness. And that's why we planned this episode for this month, is because we wanted...
to start that conversation.
We wanted to start that conversation. And again, like, I have relationships with nail techs that I've never even met. Like, we interact with each other online, we back each other up. Like, if they post a thing that's like, does anybody else feel this way? And it's like, yes, absolutely. And we start those relationships that way too, just so there is always someone to talk to, which is why we're not kidding. Like, message us, DM us,
come to our event
in October. Meet us in person.
If you think we're intimidating over the podcast, you've read us wrong.
Yeah, no, gosh. I'm often told I'm too friendly. So, yeah, like, we created this and we're creating this community because we didn't want people to feel like they were alone. And we say it at the end of probably the last few episodes when we ask this question of advice we would give to somebody on the topic we're talking about, because it's so important that you don't feel like you have to do this by yourself.
No, the more you isolate, the more dangerous it gets. That's when your mental health will take a toll.
Yes. So,
but with that,
we will end that episode here. As usual, all of the links and everything that you will need will be in the description. I'm still posting our event interest form down below, as well as my marketing book, and I think those are the only ones that aren't our social media. Yeah.
Take care of yourself this month.
Yes, take care of yourself.
Your mental health.
Focus on what you need. Until then, we'll see you guys next time.
See you next time.
Bye. Bye.